Here at Anion, we take safety very seriously, and oftentimes we'll hear a lot of other manufacturers stating the same thing. So we're going to be testing some of these sight glasses, various ones from the industry, like this one here, for example. This is a little cheapo one we got off of Amazon. I've seen this around a lot, this little birdcage looking thing. You could see when it's built from the factory, it's not even level or flat. So the question is to how much pressure that these can actually hold up to. This one here is a little bit bigger. It's a 6-inch. Since it's a bigger diameter, it has more square inches, which means there's more force pushing on it. So for example, on a 6-inch like this, for every 1 psi of force, there's 28 pounds of force pulling on this lid or pushing in opposite directions, trying to separate this thing. So by the time we get up to, say, 100 psi, that means there's actually 2,800 pounds of force trying to rip this thing in half because it's pushing this way and this way. That's what these bolts here are going to see as far as their tensile strength. But even on this one, you can see the studs that they used to build this together, they're different from one to the next. This one's got more threads on it, this one doesn't. This one's actually a little bit thicker. And then this one over here from another distributor, this one's only got 4 bolts holding the entire thing together. One of the things that definitely concerns me the most about these, on top of being just extremely oversized, is the thickness in the glass. This glass seems like it's fairly thin. From best we could tell measuring on this one, it's only about 3/8 of an inch thick. This one here might be a little bit thicker. Unfortunately, we can't really measure it real well yet. Once these things come apart or fail, then we'll go in about disassembling them and we can actually measure the true thickness of the glass on each one of these. The Anion sight glass, by comparison, is well over 1/2 inch thick. We've already shot this with a 22 and it held up to that. So I have no doubt that it's going to hold up just fine to this testing today. Now, the manufacturers from all 3 of these birdcage ones here all claim 150 psi. So we're going to put that to the test. According to ASME guidelines, in order for it to be certified at something, so let's say we want a 150 psi certification on this, or we want to claim that this is sort of safe to 150 psi, they have a minimum of 4x multiplier, or it's an F factor of 0.25 to be more precise. What that means is if everything is perfect and ideal, this thing should actually be able to withstand 4 times the amount of pressure before it fails. The reason they do that and they build that in is so that way there's a margin of safety built in. So if this thing can normally hold up to 600 psi, if you build one that's not quite right, it should still be able to hold up to 150 psi. 4x is the absolute minimum. That's taking into account nothing as far as temperature and other consideration factors. Usually what we end up with is a 4.5 to 5 times multiplier. Now that 4x multiplier is great. That gives us a nice margin of safety. However, there's one caveat to that with the ASME code, and that is if there's anything that is brittle, fragile, or ductile, meaning glass. So anything like that needs a 10x multiplier. So we're looking for 10 times the amount of force. So if these are capable of 150, we want to see them hold 1500 psi before they leak or fail. Now, of course, any testing would not be complete if we didn't put ours up to the test as well. Now our sight glass is certified for 350 psi. That means we are looking for at least 3,500 psi of pressure that this is able to hold before leaking or failing. We're going to actually be taking all of these sight glasses to a third-party test facility where they do hydro testing. What that is, instead of compressing air inside of here, which would be really dangerous, we're actually going to use a fluid to pressurize them. Now we do have a wireless transducer here that's actually going to monitor the pressure that's in it, and we'll be able to see that as well as keep a track record of exactly how much pressure each of these can handle and at what point they fail. All right, now while we do this testing, we're actually going to pre-fill these up with a dyed color solution, and then we're going to be doing it inside of a clear blast container. We'll be able to see the dye leaking out into the natural clear water on the outside of it. If they just come apart, that's going to be pretty cool too. We're going to have slow motion video footage shooting from a bunch of different angles, so hopefully we catch something really cool on this. Let's get to the test facility. All right, so now we're here at the test facility, and we're going to go ahead and start off with this little 1.5-inch guy here. Now remember, this is the one that came, it's cocked at an angle even coming from the factory, which we're not going to mess with it. We're going to pull it straight out of the box and use it as is. The other thing I noticed on this one is it appears it has silicone as far as the gaskets in there. Now silicone is not compatible with butane and propane. It will actually get eroded and eaten away over time. So all around, this is just a really poor choice, but surprisingly, this is one of the ones that we've seen the most out in the field, especially with a lot of the guys that are building their own units and that for doing extraction. So we're going to test it out today and see how safe it actually is. All right, next up we got this one here. Now this is actually the most expensive one. This one is right around $1,000. Surprisingly, for being 6-inch, it still only has 4 of these bolts on it. It does look a little bit more constructed properly in terms of being flat. However, one thing I did notice is that these are not in alignment with each other. It's almost like it's twisted from the factory. So if you get it at the right angles, you can actually see that these are kind of cocked at an angle. But again, we're not going to mess with any of this stuff. We're going to take it fresh out of the box and put it in our test unit.
That just fits. That one popped quicker.
Quicker.
It's only about 500 or something.
All right, and next up is our slightly taller one. This one again is 6 inches in diameter. This one, however, has 6 connection points instead of 4. Now, one of the connection points on the last one, it was actually one of the places we saw a failure on it in addition to the glass. So this one might hold up a little bit more, but it is important to note some of these are different. Like this stud here is actually different diameter, slightly thicker, and it doesn't have the threads that this one does. So it's even in this, it's like mismatched hardware when they assemble these things together. So definitely, again, question the quality of it, but we're going to test it.
Oh yeah, holy cow. That'll blew the hell out of that one. Oh goodness, huh?
All right, last but not least is going to be the Anion sight glass. Now this one is PSI approved for propane and butane, so we're going to put our money where our mouth is and actually test it, and we'll see how much this can hold. Well, those are some really interesting results. So we'll do the recap here, starting with this one. Now this one here, the shorter of the 6 inches with only 4 of the studs on it, this one was actually the most expensive. This one cost $1,000, and it actually scored the lowest as far as pressure rating. This one we maxed it out at 492 before it burst, and when it did, the glass blew apart spectacularly. Since the glass is what actually failed on it, we need an F factor of 0.1, meaning whatever it bursts at, we're going to take 1/10 of that. So this sight glass, although it's claimed to be rated for 150 PSI, it should actually only be rated for about 49. Now, one other thing to note on this is it actually had a failure at one of the nuts here, and it actually looks like you got the threading of the nut, so it actually stripped the threads clean out of the nut. Thankfully, we're doing it in a safe environment with a hydro test, not actually in a lab. If this were to happen in the lab, it would be pretty devastating. Next up, we have the taller 6-inch version. Now this one did slightly better at 524 PSI, but again, the glass burst on it, which means its actual safe rating for usage on this is gonna be somewhere around 52 PSI. Again, super sketchy, unsafe, and I would not recommend using it. Now, this little guy, this little cheapo thing from Amazon that we got, did actually surprisingly well. It clocked out at 1,346 PSI as the maximum on it. However, again, it's got the silicone gaskets in there, so this version of it, or this variation, you wouldn't be able to run. I am super surprised that it did that without it being, like I said, this thing is not assembled properly. But it still held up fairly well. So this one, I mean, realistically, you could run it about 130 PSI, but again, especially if you're running any propane variations, not something you want to do. And it's just super, super sketchy. Now, last up, we have the Anion one here. Now, I am very proud to say that this one clocked the highest, and we kind of assumed it would because we built it to be bulletproof, quite literally. This one, it clocked out at 3,731 PSI, and the glass was not the failure point on it. Actually, what happened first is we started leaking out of one of the NPT fittings going into this, and then pumped it up again to 3,700, and we noticed we're starting to actually bend the stainless outer frame here. So the bolts all held together, but the frame itself started to deform. At 3,700 PSI, the glass was not our failure point. Now, since the glass was not our failure point, we succeeded in hitting our 3,500 PSI, which is F factor of 0.1 on the glass. That means that survived up to 10 times the amount of pressure. The frame is what actually failed, but the frame itself only needs to survive up to 4 to 5 times the amount of pressure. So 4 times is going to be the bare minimum. Once you calculate in temperature and other factors, usually ends up being about 4.5 or 5. So the frame itself realistically only needed to survive to 1,750 PSI, whereas the glass, we need to proof that out at 3,500 PSI. We were actually able to proof out both of those at over 3,700 PSI. So when you are going to purchase extraction equipment, even if you don't buy ours, the most important thing is to make sure that it's safe. And the best way to do that is make sure you get equipment that is certified by PSI. Regardless of whether it's ours or not, at least then you know and you have peace of mind